Hello, people. I have finished a book. BWT. No, actually, that's not the title of the book. It's another Tuchman book. The March of Folly. I think this is the fourth book I've read by Barbara Tuchman, and I really like her style. I have noticed that some of her books start out a little bit slow. It takes you a little while to get going on it, and they end fantastic. And this one ended fantastic. The March of Folly it's about what it sounds like it's about. It starts out with a kind of a short chapter on Troy and concerning why in the fuck did they bring that horse inside the gates. Of course, we don't really know whether that even happened or not, but it's a metaphor for stupid decisions made by politicians and how sometimes the population can just go along with it. The next chapter was about the Renaissance popes, and that was just grueling for me to get through because I don't give a fuck about popes and bishops, and Italy at that time was just a mess, and it figures into a lot of what I read, so I've been over and over this stuff. After that was a chapter, I think it was titled How Britain Lost America, and that was pretty interesting, and while I was reading that, I was thinking, you know what, I've actually kind of ignored the Revolutionary War. I'm going to have to read about that. And then the longest chapter was Vietnam, and that was fantastic reading. And Vietnam is another thing that I really haven't read all that much about. Way back, like in my 20s, I read The 10,000 Day War, and I'm sure I didn't understand it. You have to read, as I've found out, you have to read more than one book to understand something like that. But let's get to my notes. I have my brand new note paper here. I couldn't find my yellow sticky note. This is by Barbara Tuchman, 387 pages. This was published in 1984. And we go right to some reading. The bottom of page 45 and top of page 46. Way past that. This is in the Troy. She's writing about how in the Iliad and the Odyssey, all the stupid mistakes that are made by the humans, they blame that on the gods. The question of whether a historical underpinning existed for the wooden horse was raised by Pausanias, a Latin traveler and geographer with a true historian's curiosity, who wrote a description of Greece in the 2nd century A.D. He decided the horse must have represented some kind of a war machine or siege engine because, he argues, to take the legend at face value would be to impute utter folly to the Trojans. The question still provokes speculation in the 10th century. If the siege engine was a battering ram, why did not the Greeks use it as such? If it was the kind of housing that brought assaulters up to the walls, surely it would have been even greater folly for the Trojans to take it in without breaking it open first. One can be lured this way down endless paths of the hypothetical. The fact is that although early Assyrian monuments depict such a device, there is no evidence that any kind of siege engine was used in Greek warfare or Mycenaean or Homeric times. That anachronism would not have worried Pausanias because it was normal in his, and indeed in much later days, to view the past dressed and equipped in the image of the present. I mean, you only have to look at the Peloponnesian War when the Trojans took over Attica, and Athens just stood behind their walls. The Spartans had they didn't have the know-how to breach a wall, uh, and I don't know why I did not. There's a paragraph here that I didn't mark, and it was really important. Why the hell I didn't do it, I don't know. Uh, Here, my next note is chapter on Renaissance popes. Ugh. Bottom of 114 to top of 115. And this is supposed to have to do with indulgences. And this is about a guy named Tetzel, who traveled around with a box full of indulgences and had his little rallies and sold them. I have here, Tetzel would call out, the passports to lead the human soul to the celestial joys of paradise. For a mortal sin, 7 years of penance were due. Who then would hesitate for a quarter florin to secure one of these letters of remission? Warming up, he would say that if a Christian had slept with his mother and put money in the Pope's bowl, the Holy Father had the power in heaven and earth to forgive the sin. And if he forgave it, God must do so also. God must do so also. Excuse me. Uh, in behalf of the deceased, he said that as soon as the coin rang in the bowl, the soul for whom it was paid would fly out of purgatory straight to heaven. So the popes in the Renaissance were all out of control, and they lived like fucking kings and spent money freely and sold these indulgences, and it was just crazy. And of course, everybody back then, that's all they thought about was the afterlife. So sure, they bought these indulgences. My next note, the corruption of the popes and all of Rome continues until page 122, and this I did not even know about. This is going on and on. People are bitching. Martin Luther, nails up his things. People are not happy with the popes. And this starts on May 6th. On 6th May, 1527, the Spanish-German invaders breached the walls and poured into the city. They're talking about Rome. The orgy of human barbarity that followed in the See of St. Peter's, the capital of Christendom for 1200 years, was a measure of how far the image of Rome had been demeaned by its rulers. Massacre, plunder, fire, and rape raged out of control. Commanders were helpless, and their chief, the Constable de Bourbon, was dead, having been killed the first day by a shot from the Roman walls. The ferocity and bloodthirstiness of the attackers would have moved a stone to compassion, according to a report in the Manteau archives, written in a trembling hand. The soldiers looted house by house, killing anyone who offered resistance. Women were violated regardless of age. Screams and groans filled every quarter. The Tiber floated with dead bodies. Popes, cardinals, curia, and lay officials piled into St. Angelo in such haste and crushed that one cardinal was drawn up in a basket after the portcullis was dropped. Ransoms were fixed on the wealthy and atrocious tortures devised to make them pay. If they could not, they were killed. Priests, monks, and other clergy were victimized with extra brutality. Nuns dragged to brothels or sold to soldiers in the streets. Palaces were plundered and left in flames. Churches and monasteries sacked for their treasures, relics trampled after being stripped of jeweled covers. Tombs broken open in the search for more treasure. The Vatican used as a stable. Archives and libraries were burned, their contents scattered or used as bedding for horses. Surveying the scene, even a Colonna wept. Hell has nothing to compare with the present state of Rome. And it kept going until plague arrived, and then the armies left. And here, my next one, page 203 to 204. This is going to be, we're in the British section, which was very interesting. Bottom of 203 to top of 204. Last minute reason I've got written there. The last chance for Britain to guard her own interest, to grasp an alternative that was feasible, was offered when Parliament convened in January 1775 by the outstanding statesman of his time, Lord Chatham, now ill and failing. On 20th January he moved for the immediate withdrawal of British forces from Boston as evidence that England could afford to make the first advances for Concord. He said the troops were provocative without being effective. They might march from town to town enforcing a temporary submission, but how shall you be able to secure the obedience of the country you leave behind you? Resistance to your arbitrary system of taxation might have been foreseen. What forces now would be required to put it down? What, my lords, a few regiments in America and 17,000 or 18,000 men at home? The idea is ridiculous. To subdue a region extending over 1,800 miles, populous in numbers, valorous and infused with the spirit of liberty, would be impossible. To establish despotism over such a mighty nation must be vain, must be fatal. We shall be forced ultimately to retreat. Let us retreat when we can, not when we must. And these same kind of warnings went on for years regarding Vietnam. The exact same kind of warnings. Fact-finding missions went out, and they came back and said, don't do this, you'll never win. The exact same shit. Third paragraph, 256. This is about Vietnam. And this is towards the beginning when the French were still there. The reason why the French with superior manpower and American resources were doing so poorly was not beyond all conjecture. The people of Indochina, of whom more than 200,000 were in the colonial army together with some 80,000 French, 48,000 North Africans, and 20,000 foreign legionnaires, simply had no reason to fight for France. Americans were always talking about freedom from communism, whereas the freedom from the mass that the mass of Vietnamese wanted was freedom from their exploiters, both French and indigenous. The assumption that humanity at large shared the democratic Western ideas of freedom was an American delusion. The freedom we cherish and defend in Europe, stated President Eisenhower on taking office, is no different than the freedom that is imperiled in Asia. He was mistaken. Humanity may have common ground, but needs and aspirations vary according to circumstances. 269. I really enjoyed this Vietnam thing. And Tuchman is just a fantastic author. Everything is liberally quoted with something that somebody has actually said. First paragraph. At this stage, with 8 years of American effort in aid of the French having come to nothing, and with the French effort having failed at the cost of, in French Union troops, of 50,000 killed and 100,000 wounded, the United States might have seen indications for disengagement from Indochina's affairs. The example of futility in China was fresh, where a longer and greater effort to direct that country's destinies had been designated by the communist revolution like sand before the wind, had been dissipated. It's a little hard to see in here. No inference from the Chinese experience that Western wishes might not apply to the situation, that foreign politics too is the art of the possible, had been derived. The American government reacted not to the Chinese upheaval or to Vietnamese nationalism per se, but to intimidation by the rabid right at home and to the public dread of communism that this played on and reflected. The social and psychological sources of the dread are not our subject, but in them lie the roots of American policy of Vietnam. 316. Yeah, I can hardly even see the numbers, the page numbers. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution of 7th August 1964 has been so exhaustively examined that it can afford to rest under more cursory treatment here. Its importance was that it gave the President the mandate he was seeking and left Congress suddenly staring helplessly and to some extent resentfully at its empty hands. Not a Fort Sumter or a Pearl Harbor, Tonkin Gulf was no less significant in a cause of uncertain national interest. It was a blank check for executive war. The cause was the claim of the destroyer Maddox and other naval units that they had been fired upon at night by North Vietnamese torpedo patrol boats outside the 3-mile limit recognized by the United States. Hanoi claimed sovereignty up to a 12-mile limit. A second clash followed the next day under obscure conditions never fully clarified, and subsequently, during reinvestigation in 1967, thought to have been imagined or invented. And I think we all know that the whole thing was invented. 325, third paragraph. On 9th June, the fateful decision to authorize combat support of South Vietnam by American ground forces was publicly announced by the White House, embedded in verbiage intended to show it was merely an increase in effort, not a basic change. The first search and destroy mission took place on 28th June. In July, the President announced an increase in draft quotas, along with the addition of 50,000 troops to bring strength in Vietnam to 125,000. Further additions brought the total to 200,000 by the end of 65. The purpose of these escalations, as General Taylor later explained to the Senate, was to inflict continued increasing loss on the Viet Cong guerrillas so that they cannot replace their losses, and by this attrition convince the North that it could not win a military victory in the South. Theoretically, they would virtually run out of trained troops by the end of 1966. And at that point, rather than negotiate, they might simply give up the attempt and fade away. It was in pursuit of this process that the necrophiliac body count became such an unpleasant feature of the war that the North, with a regular army of over 400,000, could in fact activate any number of men to replace Viet Cong losses, for some reason escaped the sophisticated statistical analysis of the Pentagon. And I was alive when that was going on, and I remember the body counts on TV. It was kind of a weird thing for a kid to see. At one point, just withdrawing is out of the question. At one point, they considered building a wall along the line of demarcation. A wall. Second paragraph, page 365. And I have written there, Nixon invades Cambodia. That was very near the end of the whole stupid thing. Reaction in America to the invasion was explosive, antagonizing both political extremes, impassioning debate, kindling the hate of dissenters for the government, and vice versa. While polls often showed spurts of support for Nixon's more aggressive actions, anti-war sentiment was louder and the press outspokenly hostile. The New York Times called Nixon's reasons for the invasion military hallucination, again, and affirmed that time and bitter experience have exhausted the credulity of the American people. Revelation a few months previously of the My Lai massacre, in which American soldiers, in a burst of crazy brutality, had killed over 200 unarmed villagers, including old men, women, and helpless crying children, had already horrified the public. The shock was greater when, Following Cambodia, Americans killed Americans. On 4th May at Kent State University in Ohio, the National Guard, called out by the governor to contain what appeared to him dangerous campus violence, opened fire on the demonstrators, killing 4 students. The picture of the girl student kneeling in agonized unbelief over the body of a dead companion became a memorial more familiar than any picture since the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima. The war had indeed blown back upon America. Third paragraph, 386, and that is it. This is in the epilogue. In America, where the electoral process is drowning in commercial techniques of fundraising and image-making, we may have completed a circle back to a selection process as unconcerned with qualifications as that which made Darius king of Persia. When he and 6 fellow conspirators, as recorded by Herodotus, overthrew the reigning despot, they discuss what kind of government, whether a monarchy of one or an oligarchy of the wisest men, they should establish. Darius argued that they should keep to the rule of one and obtain the best government by choosing the very best man in the whole state. Being persuaded, the group agreed to ride out together next morning, and he whose horse was the first to neigh at sunrise should be king. By ruse of a clever groom who tethered a favorite mare at a critical spot, Darius' horse performed on time, and his fortunate master, thus singled out as the best man for the job, ascended the throne. And I don't know if Tuchman is still alive. I don't know what Tuchman would make of the political situation in the United States, but having a horse that neighs first, I mean, it can't be any worse than what we have now. Thanks for watching. Jesus, 22 minutes.